JJ the CPA here. Hope you're doing well. This just in, hot off the press, Dear Western. I have a client that filed for an EIN back in 2018 but haven't filed any tax returns for that entity, but now they want to use this EIN. So I'm concerned about penalties. Well, a number of things come into play here. The first thing to note is that you didn't create the circumstance. Your client obtained an EIN. I'm assuming you weren't aware of it. They didn't file returns. You weren't aware of it. So all you are able to do now is help them through this potential mess. A lot of different directions to go here. The first thing I'll note to you is that typically a business does not need to file until it has taxable activity. It doesn't mean net taxable income, but if it's generating income, then it would need to file a return. So I'm assuming with a big assumption that if they obtained an EIN but haven't filed tax returns, that means it's been dormant, as in no assets, no activity. It's done nothing, nada. So technically, as I see it, there wouldn't have been a filing requirement. However, if upon the time getting the EIN, they answered questions in a certain way that the IRS had an expectation of a tax return being filed, it would be indicated on that letter that they received from the IRS when they got that EIN. Of course, typically that letter is obtained online. But that's where I would start. Take a look at that letter. What is the IRS expecting? And then proceed in that manner. Now, one of the easy ways around it, I know from your question you added some other facts and circumstances, but when we're answering Dear Western questions, we can't get very specific in specific client circumstances. But what you may want to talk to the client about is, even though they are concerned about the process of starting over and they now want to use the EIN because it seems the simplest route, well, you'll need to help them weigh that out. Well, is it going to be simpler to just start over and get an EIN, given that they hadn't done anything with the EIN, including filing? Or do they want to use this EIN and then just face whatever circumstances will come from that? Now, penalties definitely could come into play if the IRS was expecting a return to be filed. So when you go to file the returns, there are a couple of different ways you could go about this. And this is where we may have a lot of different opinions on how to go about it, because just like anything, there's so many different routes based on facts and circumstances, based on our experience on how we would want to go about it. So I'm giving you some friendly advice, some ideas, a direction to go. But know this, again, if there is no activity, as in nothing, nada, nothing, and again, not then a filing requirement, but the IRS does think there should have been a tax return filed back when it first obtained the EIN, what you might consider, hear this, consider, is filing that initial return, but also marking it final. This may then only put you in a position with your client of just having to see about getting abated on penalties for 1 year. And again, if there was no activity, as in nothing, nada, then you're filing that initial return as a final, because there then wouldn't be any filing requirements after 2018 until now when there's activity. So you can also then request an abatement of a first-time penalty, if you will. And I'm going to give you a link in the body of this video to that and how to go about it. And it starts with there needs to have been good compliance by that business. And so I'll let you see about that, because if you are going to file an initial and final return, or if you decide, you know what, I'm going to file a return for 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, now filing going forward, well, then you can tackle all those penalties for all those years. I don't know that it'll all qualify for the first time penalty abatement. You'll have to see, but you can go through that process. But again, the other options that you may weigh with your client is maybe they do just need to start over. Remember, you didn't put them in these circumstances. They chose 6 years ago to get an EIN. They chose not to file a tax return related to that. Maybe it's not a big deal. But if you're now facing these matters to have to address, ensure that they're aware of it, as well as the cost for you to respond to it. Because we know that with the IRS, this may also generate additional penalties if they don't believe only 1 year was required. And therefore, you're going to have a letter for each year with penalties to request abatement for each year. And maybe the IRS won't abate all of them for multiple years. They may use that to say, well, you didn't have good compliance. You'll have to wait and see upon filing. But we also know with the IRS, just given the response time, is that you will send a letter of response to a penalty. And typically with the IRS, it takes time for them to process that letter to then respond to it. And so what I tell clients is that if we've gotten some kind of penalty notice, let's say inadvertently, the IRS thinks a client or a business didn't file a tax return on time, maybe because the extension had to be filed by paper, just one example. What I tell the client is, okay, we have this penalty. We're going to request first-time abatement here. But when the IRS sends you that letter, even if we respond immediately, most likely the IRS will have already put in the works the second letter to follow up about the penalty and requesting it be paid. With the automated system that the IRS has, they have to generate these letters well in advance to when they're actually received. And so I just tell the client, you automatically should know this. You're going to get another letter on this because they will have not processed the response we're sending in time, and you may get a third letter. And then most likely the IRS, upon receiving that letter, may say, well, we need more time. And then they may have a question. And then there's maybe a letter, hopefully abating that. So you're looking at multiple IRS letters that require multiple responses. And that requires time and effort on your part, which then you should be paid for. So many times with a taxpayer or a business, they may think, well, you didn't do your job because I've got this penalty notice, so I shouldn't have to pay you to correct this. So you want to make it crystal clear to them of the penalty potentials, the effort to fight those penalties, to help them then weigh, well, do we just need to start over? Because in the long run, that's probably what I'd be recommending to my client. You just need to start over. I appreciate you got an EIN 6 years ago, but you didn't stay compliant. You didn't file returns. So it doesn't necessarily exist just because you still have a piece of paper. And if you think it still exists, okay. But now we have these hurdles to get over. So again, the client put themselves in that circumstances. You can definitely help them dig out of the hole, but ensure they're aware of what's to come and the costs associated, the penalties, and they may not get abated. All right, that's a hairy one, so good luck with that. All right, if you've got a question, feel free to email dearwestern@westerncpe.com.